Hey everybody, your old pal Shawn here. We have a great episode for you today. We're going to talk about how to be on a health journey, how to advocate for your wellness. But before we get started, please make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe. If you're in a good position, if you want to support the podcast, please consider checking out our givesendgo.com/SZP. Anything that comes in is going to go directly back into the podcast. Eventually get us editing, maybe a better set, better production value. Now that that's all done, let's get on with the show. There's a quote that I heard years ago. It's very powerful. And I'm not really a quote guy, but once in a while there's one that sticks. So here it goes. Health is the crown only the sick can see. Now, I'm not sure who the originator of that quote is, but if you ever went through a hard time, if you've ever had difficulty breathing, if you ever had a serious illness, or even a minor one that inconvenienced you, you couldn't wait to feel better. And unfortunately, so many people don't. They don't feel well. And I'm not pretending to be a doctor. I'm not a doctor, not a surgeon, not a nutritionist. I'm not a nurse practitioner. I'm not a health professional of any kind. I'm a lay person. And even if I had some insight, and I'm not claiming I do, please understand that I don't know you. I don't know what's appropriate for you at this particular stage of your life. But the goal of this episode isn't to tell you what to do. It's to give you a range of ideas and options on the path so that you can, if you're going through a hard time, so that you can explore and maybe find something that'll be helpful to you. And coming from a place of humility, where I'm not a professional, not claiming to be an expert, but I just came across a lot of information over the years, a lot of stories from people that I interacted with. Maybe some of this could be helpful to you. So if you're in need of help, or one day, maybe I hope some of this can alleviate the challenges. I have a friend, and wellness has been a part of her life for decades. And she's a therapist. She helps people quit smoking. She learned various modalities, meditation and hypnosis and breath work, and she did all the seminars, went to retreats, different techniques and approaches. How does one get well? Because she really struggled. These deep, intense emotions, and she's doing Vipassana. She's paying attention to her emotions. She's breathing. She's stretching. She's trying to bring the prana in. She's trying to exercise. She's doing the seminars. She's getting the green juices. She's trying different diets and, struggling. And in her case, I'm not claiming it's going to be this way for everybody. But in her case, the only intervention that proved to be effective was to get a clean diet. She eliminated all the processed food and variety of other things such as alcohol and whatnot, and that completely changed her life. And she related to me that often take away the word often. She related to me that, say, if family was in town for the holidays, she could deviate a meal, could have a Christmas dinner, maybe two. But she said if there were families in town for holidays, if she deviated from the plan 1, 2, 3 times, there's a certain number, a certain intensity, and that was going to emotionally, psychologically set her back for months and months. So she found that the most caring thing for herself was to stay away from these things. I'm not sure if she eventually found some kind of balance after we talked about it, but this is the only thing that helped. Now, she could know it. She could meditate on it. She could do breath work. She could stretch. She could exercise. She could do anything. But something about the chemistry of certain foods entering her system was very impactful to her. It really hurt. And so, there's something to consider there. You see, our diet is very important. It's where we get our vitamins, our minerals, and many other compounds that the body really needs to thrive. And it's so much more than just the old industrial revolution model of calories in, calories out. Because there's a big difference between, getting 1,000 calories from chocolate cake and 1,000 calories from a highly nutritious natural meal. Now, I'm not advocating a particular diet here. I've been experimenting since probably 2005, and I've had, and several of these I did for a year or more. I did the regular American diet. I was a vegetarian. I was a vegan. I was on a bulletproof diet. I was on a carnivore diet. I was on a ketogenic diet. I was on a high alkaline diet. I was on a medical medium diet. I was on the Ray Peat metabolic health diet. I was on an Ayurvedic diet. I was on, and so I'm not advocating any particular one diet for you. But if you think about it, our organs are only so big. Your stomach's what, like this big? And I don't mean all the fat that sometimes accumulates around. I mean the organ itself. It's not that large. I live in the US. You can easily get a few plates that are like this. Somehow, if we're trying to cram all that in there at one time, well, that's a lot of work on the system. And even more so if they're foods that the body didn't really evolve to process efficiently. And especially if you're dehydrated or you're highly stressed or you have some level of dysfunction elsewhere in the body. Food can be a medicine or it can be a disease causing pathway. And a lot of times it's the dosage, and people say all things in moderation, but a certain amount of poison in moderation isn't ideal. A certain amount of getting kicked in the balls or getting shot in the foot isn't ideal. Now, you can decide what your ratio is based off of your life experience. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just trying to lay this out here as something to explore. Now, I went through a period of time where I worked most of the time 8 hours a day, mostly 7 days a week. Sometimes my longest streak was 145 days in a row. And eventually we went to 12 hours, and I was often working 86 hours a week. Now, I would have my 3 lunch breaks, and sometimes where I would eat at each of those, and sometimes I'd also get vending machine food and also food from the food truck. And often, because I was working a lot, I wanted to decompress. I'd go to the bar, I'd get some alcohol, I'd again have even more food. And because it was my social interaction. I was a regular, people knew me there. And what I found was eventually I started to get a variety of symptoms. I'm very aware of my body, and I've told this story a number of times. But, when my heart rate starts going up, like, oh, it's my resting heart rate is 40 beats a minute higher than it was a month ago. And got tingling in my cheek and in my arm, and I have pressure on my heart. And, my extremities are going numb super easily. And, it's hard to take full breaths, and, vision distortions and stuff going on with my skin and all this. And I would rush to the ER, and then they'd check me and they go, oh, you're good. I'm like, well, clearly I'm not good if all this is going on. I can't do anything for you. And then I'd go and see a specialist, and the specialist goes, well, as far as I can tell, there's nothing going on with you. And I'm not going to treat you or look any deeper into this unless you're in such pain that you're losing sleep over it. And I understand he was coming from a good place and trying to help, and they're concerned it's anxiety, but I'm like, well, the anxiety came from something. I wouldn't be anxious if I wasn't detecting all these different symptoms. And of course, like a fool, I was going on WebMD and going, okay, obviously it's a new type of cancer that spreads MS through your body, and then it releases enzymes that proliferate AIDS throughout your system. Obviously, it's something like that. And then it's going to cause you to die, and then everyone's going to laugh at you at your funeral and talk about how small your dick was. That's one of the symptoms. And you just don't appreciate how much health matters until it feels like you're losing it. And I was going to all kinds of specialists and ER, and as soon as I would go, I'd come back and almost inevitably another symptom would crop up, and I'd think, fuck, if only I had the symptom appear a little bit earlier, then I could have reported that, and maybe they would have checked something else. And it was so frustrating for everyone to say, oh, you're healthy, you're healthy. There's nothing wrong with you. And it's like, yeah, I get there is anxiety, and I can appreciate that. But I'm anxious because I'm detecting something. And all of you are just saying it doesn't exist. Well, fortunately, in my case, I ended up talking to my old Qigong teacher, and he told me, hey, get on a good, strong B complex. And I did, and that resolved a lot of my issues. Diet is super important, but if you've ever explored diet, you could find it to be very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. Because nothing's healthy. Everything's going to kill you. At least if you walk down the diet aisle of a bookstore, you open a page, okay, you eat eggs, and then the other one, don't eat eggs. Okay, you can eat egg yolks, but if you eat the whites, it kills you. And then the next one, if you eat the egg whites, you're going to live forever, but the yolks, no, that's going to make your hair fall out and your teeth turn to dust. So you don't want to do that. And it's like, what the fuck? And every food has studies and has people who didn't do well on those foods, and you're just like, oh my God, what? I just want to eat. So this isn't me pretending that I'm a doctor, but just laying out some things that I found important on my health journey. So I was recommended to get onto a functional medicine elimination diet. So what that consisted of was no artificial colors, no MSG, no processed foods, no alcohol, no sugar, no flour, no gluten, no dairy, and stuff like this. And the idea of an elimination diet is You begin by eliminating things that most people who have issues have sensitivities to. And that is a path. And the idea is one at a time after your system heals more. Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, depending how far down you are. Then maybe you can introduce one of those and see how you do. And if you get a bunch of symptoms from it, you keep it aside. Now, there are some very extreme versions of this. Vegan, vegetarian version I heard was all melon. I've never tried to live off of all melon. I have some skepticism about all melon. But, that's that's one approach. On the other extreme, some people do really well on just ruminant meat. Some people who are extremely sensitive, have autoimmune issues, for whatever reason, they seem to do really, really well on just ruminant meat. Just things like steak, just things like lamb, just for whatever reason, a lot of people seem to do well on that, especially if they have autoimmune issues. And then maybe you can add more stuff in. I hear some extreme cases you can. I don't understand this well enough, but I'm just throwing things out there that might be helpful to you. Now, to help you on this quest to try and figure out what the fuck you can eat. Now, again, I'm going to name some products, some services, some people. I am not affiliated with anybody. I'm not being financially compensated by any of these. None of these people know me personally. I haven't been contacted by anybody. I'm just trying to share resources. There are things like food sensitivity tests you might be interested in taking. There are things like food allergy tests you might be interested in taking. Sometimes there's things like the genome diet where they test your genome and they try and find things that people who've historically had your type of background have been able to eat and do well on. That's one angle. Another angle, there's a company called Viome, and what they do. Well, now they have a wider menu of services, but when I looked at them, what they do is you send in a stool sample, maybe a blood sample, and they test it, and they analyze all the bacteria in your gut. And the idea is, based off of what bacteria is in your gut, that's going to determine if you can properly assimilate and process that food. Because if you don't have the bacteria that can process that food, then it's going to cause irritation and inflammation in the body. And so that's the gist behind that theory. I'm not claiming it's true, but it's a good place to work, to explore. And they'll give you a list of superfoods that you can eat infinitely and should really try and put in a lot. And they'll give you a list of foods that you can eat infinitely, but aren't quite as beneficial. Then they'll have some that you can have sometimes and some you really should avoid. And then after 6 months, because some of the bacteria in your system should change by that point, then they'll give different recommendations. And that's one approach. And of course, now they have other services where they could test for different things and tell you how different systems are functioning in your body. It's amazing what we can do with technology. But this is one angle to really take a look at if you're struggling with what to eat. Another angle you could look at is look at your ancestry. Look at where your people hail from, where your parents and grandparents and their parents are from, and see what they ate during those times and try and eat similar. That's a theory that some people have done well on, so you might want to explore that one, particularly if, like Viome, it's not a terribly expensive service, but it does cost something. So take a look at that. Now, another reason food is important. I mentioned you have vitamins and minerals and different things. I really gained a big appreciation when I found out that, oh, a B complex is just going to make my life way, way better. And I work night shift a lot, so often vitamin D is recommended for me. So that's something. And a lot of people say, yeah, but if you get D, if you get the D, then you should probably get a K2 supplement to go with it. And they're like, oh, then really what you should do is get your magnesium so it helps you absorb the K2, which helps you absorb the D. And you're thinking, how hard is it to take the D? But a diet is always so difficult. And then you hear things like, yeah, but you need to have a certain amount of silica, which helps you to process the vitamins and minerals, which helps you process, and it's a complicated thing. But long story short, one of the things I generally recommend people doing is work with a clinician or different blood work service and be tested for vitamin and mineral and micronutrient levels, because those can all be hints at something that could improve. And there's a certain level of like deficiency. And then above that, there's not deficiency. And above that, there's like optimum levels for where your system should really be able to do pretty well at that with that particular resource. Some interesting services. Again, I'm not affiliated with these in any way. Function Health has a ton of different things they could test for you. Their basic thing, I think, right now is 118 biomarkers. And it'll look at all your systems. And again, they also give food recommendations like Viome, for instance, but they'll look at many biomarkers and give you tips and ideas for how to improve. Similar services that I have less experience with are Ways to Well, Merrick Health, Life Force. I haven't tried any of these, but the way I understand them, it sounds very similar. And they'll analyze your biomarkers and your blood work, your vitamins, minerals, etc. See where you're at and try and guide you in the right direction, try and get you to top off your levels and so that you can optimize how your system's going to work. This is generally a pretty interesting way to move forward. Now, this is anecdotal, and I'm not making these claims, but I'm putting this out there. In a number of things I've read, a number of the interviews I've seen, people who are in functional medicine, they say sometimes they'll encounter people who are somewhere on the spectrum. They're somewhere, some degree autistic, or people who, particularly kids who will have ADHD and similar circumstances. What they found is often when they get the right vitamins and minerals just right, a lot of times they have a more what people would call neurotypical life after that. Now, I'm not making this promise or this claim, but it's interesting. I'm just throwing it out there as something to explore. Another thing to consider is our bodies. Anatomically, modern humans have lived for 200,000 years. That's the most consistent number I've been seeing for the last few years, so that's the one I'm going with. And again, I'm not a scientist, doctor, or anything. Take what I say with a grain of salt, but understand could be some value somewhere. Once you are working on your diet, once you're trying to get your micro and macronutrients to where they need to be, you're trying to figure this out. By the way, one more thing. I know some people who cannot have more than like 20 grams of protein a day. It might kill them. Okay? So this is not a recommendation. A lot of people seem to do well when they have 1 gram per protein for every pound of their goal weight. So if they want to weigh 150 pounds, 200 pounds, etc., that's a good range to try and work in if you don't have some extreme sensitivity that could do harm to your body. So please talk to your doctor. Do not rely on people on the internet. Now, another thing to consider is we've been around for 200,000 years. And it really seems like there are certain things we do better with being around. Certain amount of sun. I'm not saying if you never have sun, suddenly spend 10 hours in it. No. But if you don't get a lot of sun, 10 minutes a day, and looking in the general direction of the sun, not staring directly at it, this does a lot for your system. Along with that, having a light hygiene program. You know, if you're trying to go to sleep and you're in front of blue lights that simulate the rising sun, which should get your body starting to wake up. You know, less technology as you're getting ready to go to bed. Red lights the last hour before bed. Different things like this, trying to help your system get in sync. Also, I know it's not possible for everybody, having a regular circadian rhythm. You know, generally get up around the same time, eat around the same time. These things are generally good guidelines for a lot of people. So this could be something to look into. I understand it might not be applicable in your situation, but it's helpful for many, many people. Get some sun. Getting a lot of oxygen. Learn to breathe properly. And do some deep breathing exercises of various kinds. There are a lot of people who do breath work. There's a lot of different approaches, but breathing deeply helps. There's an old quote, I believe it's by Farmer Burns. Deep breathing alone has made many a sick man, many a weak man strong, and many a sick man well. This seems to be very true. There's a folksy kind of wisdom before we had so many wonderful studies out there. But, you know, over generations, you make certain observations, and sometimes you're inside too long. Fresh air and sunshine is a kind of medicine. And you get out there, you're breathing well. There's something to that. There are things called like forest bathing. And I always thought that, or grounding, and I always thought this was hippie bullshit. But there's starting to be, it's not an overwhelming body of evidence, but there's starting to be some evidence that, hey, if you spend time in the forest and you're not getting eaten by a bear, there's something soothing in that. Or if you're by a lake or an ocean, or there's something healing in that. And you're breathing. These are things to look at. You know, for many generations, people have been going to the mountains or going to the woods or going to the beach to heal. There's something healing in being in nature. And you don't have to believe me. You can just go and spend some time there and relax. And that's another interesting angle to look at. Physical exercise wise, that's a pretty important thing to get figured out. Now, I don't believe in, if you never worked out, do some really intense routine. That's not what I'm suggesting you look into. If your doctor clears you for physical activity, building the habit is more important than intensity or volume in the beginning. And I suggest just starting off with something, whether it's walking around a room, doing a few push-ups. And if you can't do push-ups, can you do them on your knees? And if you can't do them on your knees, can you do them like on a table where it's mostly standing up and you're just holding like some of your weight while you're doing the push-ups? If you can do that, this can start getting you in the habit, and you just, hey, I'm just putting in my 5 minutes. Once the habit is established, Then you could add some intensity and there's some volume, and eventually you could do full workouts consistently. But when establishing the habit is valuable on a couple fronts. One, it makes it easier to stick to. Two, by gradually building in this way, you're not going to beat yourself up and be overly tired and exhausted for with the attitude of, oh my God, I just worked all day. Now I'm going to torture myself in the gym. I'm going to be sore for 3 weeks, and no one wants that. That might be something if you're trying to set a record or if you have some really important sporting contest. But in general, or like some life saving emergency situation. But outside of those three, there usually aren't a lot of reasons to try and push yourself to be beat up for a very long time. You have to find the right ratio of your body's ability to adapt. Yeah, being a little sore, being a little tired is one thing. Some resistance training, whatever that looks like. I'm not going to tell you to do lift weights or do calisthenics or do cables or whatever. Some form of resistance training is good. Cardiovascular system. Can you handle certain degrees of intensity? Could you do a high burst of effort for 30 seconds, rest 30 seconds, and do that 10 times? Could you do that? Could you have a low moderate level of exercise for 30, 40 minutes at a shot? I'm not saying these are the ultimate benchmarks, but they're different things to look at that maybe gradually, slowly, you could build up some capacity in your system so that you just function better and you're less likely to get hurt. Again, I have no affiliation with this group, but something very, very interesting to consider. There's a group called Human Garage, and they have things called fascial maneuvers. Basically, it's manipulating the fascia. The fascia is like this thin membrane we have in our body that connects to every nerve and bone, etc. in the body. And they twist it and go into very supportive positions and breathe. And physically, it relieves a lot of stress very easily, especially with some consistency. And stress can also be emotional stress. Sometimes things you've been carrying on yourself. Now, there are other modalities like this that I'm just not aware of off the top of my head, Qigong and yoga. But there's so much variation in schools of Qigong and yoga. I haven't found one that's that consistent in this form. But that fascial maneuvers by Human Garage is helpful, could be worth checking out. Another thing to look at is hydration, and it's not just how much are you drinking. It's, for example, if you just drink super filtered water, you think you're doing, oh yeah, my water is clean as fuck. But the idea is you could be dehydrating your system and flushing electrolytes out because there's nothing in it. But if it's mineral water, so I like to put a couple drops of trace minerals in, or maybe a really, really high quality, a bit of a really high quality salt to put minerals in my water. And just drink that. Some people have different ideas of teas or juices or whatnot, and I'm trying not to be very controversial on this. You can explore whatever diet you want, but that's definitely something for you to take a look at. The most important foundation to health is your sleep. The faster you fall asleep, the deeper your sleep, I don't want to say the longer, because if you're sleeping 14 hours a day, unless you're super ill, that's gonna make you groggy and not very helpful. But long deep sleep consistently is what we need. Couple tips for how to sleep. 1, cut off technology like an hour before bed. 2, cut off water or drinks of any kind, like 3 hours before bed, because you don't want to be waking up having to go to the bathroom. Food, cut yourself off 4 hours before bed so you already partially digested a lot of your food. And your system doesn't have to put as much energy into digesting while you're sleeping. I know a lot of people think that's nonsense. I think there's at least some truth to it just from my experience. My general attitude with these different things is, let's see, I don't know. If I try a technique or an exercise or an approach, I'm not believing in it, I'm not disbelieving it. My attitude is, okay, let's find out. And sometimes I'm surprised how helpful something is, and sometimes I get good information that it's not a particularly high return on my investment of time and energy doing that. So I'm just sharing with you some universal things that seem to be able to wiggle people onto the path. And again, one more thing on the exercise front. I understand that not everybody is particularly mobile. This isn't an ableist kind of idea. We want to expand capacity. And if all you could do is breathe, okay, breathing exercises. If all you could do is flex your muscles, okay, that's the path. If all you could do is flex your muscles or isometrics, I mean, you could look that up online. Holding particular positions, okay, if that's all you could do, and gradually, slowly, you could build up. You might say, oh yeah, but it's not the super cool feats of strength or athleticism I like to do. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. You're not starting there, but improve, get on the path, and you'll be better off than if you weren't, as long as you're careful and as long as your doctor approves of that activity level, because they understand your system a lot better than I ever will. Now, for your sleep, again, I've found that if I'm in a dark, quiet room, that's cool. If I was outside during the day, if I didn't have like a real emotional interaction right before I went to bed, that's going to keep me awake. If I didn't drink right before, I'm not going to wake up to use the bathroom. If I already ate a few hours before, my food's pretty far into digestion cycle, I generally sleep fairly well. I try and keep my room relatively cool. My body's warm. My head is cool. That's typically how I like it. If you had some exercise earlier in the day, that often helps. Sometimes, depending on the type of exercise, if you do it right before bed, might be it might jazz you up and energize you more and let you sleep. So picking the right dosage could be a factor. And establishing a regular schedule, not one of these, oh, I got up at 9, then I slept in, got up at 1 p.m., slept in, then I just stayed awake all day. When you have a real erratic schedule like that, it's very hard on the body to get a cycle, get a system. But when you start to apply multitude of these kinds of things, it's very helpful. One note that I want to make is, I remember years ago, I was reading fairly often from different sources that, oh ho ho, peak performers, they tend to sleep 6.5 hours. And so people were trying to do that, thinking, I want to be a peak performer, I want to be energized all day, so I'm going to sleep 6.5 hours. What they found was, for many, many people, that wasn't enough. Now, why? Peak performers often have very clean diets and aren't partaking of substances, at least very often. And they're often in shape. Maybe they do saunas. Maybe they get massages. Maybe they do other things It's part of the whole package that helps their body recover. But when the only thing you're doing to help your system recover is sleep, you're going to need a bit more sleep. So that's about as far as I'm going to say on that. There are people far better educated on each of these subjects. My goal here is really just to give you ideas where to look if you're lost. Because if everyone's telling you you're great and you know you're not, it's very frustrating. Another thing I'm going to talk about, now this one is controversial, but it can't hurt. So, I have no affiliation with this person or his group or any of his people. There's a guy named Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he had a terrible spinal injury. And they said unless he got this very, very, very invasive surgery, he was never going to walk again, let alone do martial arts and train and work out again. But he was always into like spiritual stuff. And he said, you know what? This is my chance to experiment, to try and make my life better, to try and really walk the walk. So he did. And without getting a surgery, he's fine. Short time later, he was walking around. Short time later, he's working out again. And decades later, he's in good shape, as far as I could tell. I often hear people comment on how in shape he is when they meet him. So he must be pretty in shape. And he said, one of his things he said was, if I heal from this, I'm going to spend my life studying this. So he studied spontaneous remission. If you're not familiar with spontaneous remission, medically, at a science level, it's people healed and we don't know why. And so he found a bunch of people who healed from different things, interviewed them, and found out, well, what did you guys do? And, they believed their body could heal. They believed their body knew how the body worked. They believed that they could get that they could turn their lives around and all this kind of thing. Now, a lot of people said this is pseudoscience. And I'll generously say that it's true that there's not an overwhelming body of evidence that this works. But here's the thing. So if you would just go on his YouTube channel, he has probably 800 videos of people who, this is going to sound ridiculous. I mean, I've seen some shit, but the consistency and sheer volume of these things. Now, he has documentaries about studies he does. They're still doing more studies. There's always scientists testing people at their gene expression, their telomeres, their blood work, they're bringing in x-rays and MRI results after seminars. They always have data coming in. So they're doing research. There's more room to do. But out of 800 plus videos, I particularly like, they have two versions. Some of them are really long where they go out, lay out their whole story. And some are real short where like, oh, I had this diagnosis. I made these changes and I'm better. And it's like a much shorter thing. I tend to like the longer stories because like it brings a tear to your eye hearing these journeys. And it's not like hot people going up on stage and saying, ooh, look at me, I'm so hot. And, I got sick and then I wanted to be better and I was better. No, it's like horrendous shit. People who were told they had like a month or 2 months to live, people who had rare genetic disorders, people who had mitochondrial conditions, people who had tumors in the brain, a person who had their thyroid removed, people who were blind, people who had lost the ability to walk. healed. I know this sounds ridiculous. But when you hear the people practicing and doing the work, now what's doing the work consist of? Well, I'll get to that, but let me sell this to you a little more. When you hear these people talking about they're doing the work, and the work consists, I'm just gonna go right to the testimonials. They'll say things like, "Oh, Bob had cancer," and Bob will go on and he'll say, "Oh yeah, diagnosed with this cancer. I had this kind of time to live, and I tried chemo and it made me worse, and I almost died, and then they gave me like a week to live, and then this Joe Dispenza book showed up, and I started listening to his interviews, and I figured this is it. This is it. This is my way home." And then you'll hear these people and they'll say, "Okay, here's the work. Every day, meditating 1, 2, 3 times a day on who they want to be and what attitude they're no longer going to accept in their lives. They're no longer going to think of themselves as sick. They're no longer going to hate. They're no longer going to hold on to their grudges or their misery or their pain or the thing that happened to them. They're going to focus on love and gratitude for this moment and the life they're creating." And it's hard because sometimes you hear these poor people talking about, oh, and they're doing it and then they get worse and their hair falls out and, the doctor shortens their life expectancy. Oh, yeah, you were going to live a year. Now you got 6 months. And, by the way, you have 6 more tumors and like horrible, horrible shit. But they're like, but I took that as my sign that, hey, there's more work to do. And even if I'm going to go grateful, and I'm going to go enjoying every moment of my life that I have left. And son of a bitch, there's 800 plus testimonials there because something really works. Now here is what the work consists of. Number 1, they are reading the books. They are listening to the podcast. They are getting so mentally agile in understanding the theory and the mechanics of what the system does and how they're lowering their stress and upregulating their genes by signaling. My mind's not here at the moment, but long story short, they're lowering their stress. They're feeling better. They're breaking patterns of hate, anger, sadness, depression, misery, greed, guilt, shame. They're focusing on who living the life that they want to live and living it today. And every time they notice that they're not living that, okay, they just stop and breathe and they get right back to it. Now there's some breathing exercises with this and it's accelerated by going to events, it seems. But, this isn't a quick pill. This is on average 6 to 18 months of every single fucking day these people doing the work. Meditating 1, 2, 3 times a day. Every time they find themselves in the possibility of being angry at themselves or feeling like they're not good enough or not worthy, they're changing it and they're focusing on being gratitude for what they have, feeling love for life, feeling abundant and whole. And, some of the stories, it was even up to 3 years they're working on this every day. Every day. This isn't something that, for 3 days we did this in a lab, even though they do have some stuff from weekend and week-long events in study format. But if you look at the testimonials, between 6 months and 18 for the most of them, 36 for the longest, and people are transforming their lives. And I used to be in a Joe Dispenza Facebook group, and I encountered this woman who had a healing there, and it was just the most heart wrenching and amazing thing that that you could hear about how this person had no health and no chance at life, and instead took a chance on the unknown and stepped into that future and worked on it every day. And then getting the x-rays, getting the blood work, getting the MRIs, because that's prudent. And doctors saying, I don't know why you're here, because there's nothing wrong with you. Now, I'm not saying this is going to resolve your issues, but I'm saying even if it doesn't, it'll really train you to improve the quality of your life at a psychological and emotional level. You'll shift the levels of stress you have, and just by lowering your stress, you're going to have more energy. And hopefully, that's going to mean more energy for recovery, more energy for repair. Hopefully, that's going to mean more energy to get your health back. So that's another detail that I think is worth at least considering, at least investigating. And there are other people doing it, but I haven't seen yet anybody as consistent as Joe Dispenza's group, as they don't articulate it. I haven't encountered another group that articulates it quite as well. It has that sheer level of intensity and volume of great shifts in this level. So again, meditate a couple times when you're in the mood for it. That's not gonna shift something. Whenever you intuitively feel like it, that's not going to create the shifts you want. But making it a discipline of transforming your life creatively every day. Changing your chemistry over and over and over again. Changing the way you think, speak, act, feel, and live. That's an enormously powerful thing. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling you to replace anything with this approach, but adding it in the tool bag along with getting a good diet, making sure your macronutrients are being hit, checking your blood work, following your doctor's recommendations, getting the right level of exercise, getting some sun, getting maybe some sauna, a light hygiene program, a diet, set yourself up for success with a good dietary program. Community is very, very, very healing. If you're laughing a lot, if you have some human contact, a pat on the shoulder, a hug, a handshake, a fist bump, that's extraordinarily powerful too. We're social creatures. When we don't have these things, it's a lot more difficult. That's why they say solitary confinement is a very cruel type of practice, because people have a very hard time keeping their sanity when they're totally, totally isolated. Of course, there are people who do better than this than others, but when you another thing with the Joe Dispenza thing is when you have people who've done things that you want to do, it makes it more believable. Like, for example, if no one in your family ever started a business that was successful, it might seem out of reach and impossible to have a successful business. If nobody ever, gained a bunch of weight and then became like real fit, if you're in a difficult spot with your weight, that might be a hard thing to do. Like, diets don't work, exercises don't work, nothing works. Well, stuff works for people. But when you have more examples of possibility in your environment that you're interacting with, oh, wow, Todd lost 60 pounds, 100 pounds. And, Betty lost 40 pounds, and, Sally lost 120 pounds. And you start to get these examples of, and this person, man, he used to be so skinny, but now we're kind of in good shape. When you start to get examples like this, it starts to open up the possibility for belief. There's for a long time, the belief existed that we could not run physically as human beings run a 4-minute mile, that it was impossible. And scientists were uh, saying, it's impossible. The physics of the body will not allow this to occur. And then once Roger Bannister did it, then next year 4 more people did it. And now often high schoolers can do it. And if you would look at an Olympic gold medal winning gymnastics routine from 1910 versus now, hey, 1910, they were very athletic. What we're doing now is outrageous. The sheer leap of improvement and progress in the sport and in what we could get out athletes to be able to accomplish is outstanding. Sometimes what you need are demonstrations of possibility, and that's one good thing with the Joe Dispenza stuff. When you're watching these people tell their heart-wrenching tales, and then, they had the condition that you had, and they got better doing this, and they're happy, and that's something. Again, I'm not promising if you do this, you'll be happy, or you'll be healthier. What I am promising, though, is if you're super consistent in practice for 3 years, your life's going to be better, regardless of what your health condition is. If you are super consistent in quote unquote doing the work. Now, that should incorporate everything we're talking about and work along with your medical team because they're trained. I'm not. But if I was in a difficult situation again, this is certainly something I would look at. Now, that doesn't mean that I might also not consider a surgery or some other kind of a medication or chemo or something, given the right circumstances. That doesn't mean I wouldn't look at those. But I would like to have the other pillars in place as well. I understand that given your particular condition, some of these might not be accessible to you. Well, do as much as you can with the ones that are accessible to you. For most of history, people maybe had one book or like one lesson that they really had to extract all of the wisdom from and really apply the hell out of because they didn't have the great abundance that we do. But if you are on a health journey, you're trying to improve your wellness, please consider some of these paths. I also want to recommend something. So there are new avenues of medicine out there. There's functional medicine, and the gist behind functional medicine is they want to look at the complete picture. For example, if someone's having an issue with the liver, they want to know why they're having an issue with the liver, not just treat the liver, because maybe it's a dietary thing. Maybe there's something in their environment. I had a friend who for years and years and years had a very uncomfortable digestive gut pain situation for years. Happened to see an interview. And in his case, he found out it was because of mold in his environment. And, he did a special cleansing program for that. I'm not sure what that consisted of. And he got the mold out of his environment, and that went away. Sometimes it's an environmental thing like mold or parasites or maybe a chemical in your particular region. Maybe it's stress at work. Maybe it's stress in your mind. Maybe you're fighting in your relationship. Maybe it's a trauma or something you learned or inherited from your family. there is a lot to discover, a lot to work on. As I said, also, so the idea of functional medicine is that you want to get to the root of what's creating the symptoms. A lot of times people just treat the cancer, but why is there cancer there to begin with? And that's what functional medicine does. Not every functional medicine practitioner is equal, but it's a good thing to look at. Regenerative medicine is very cool. So we used to think that there were tissues in the body, organs, nerves, etc., that tendons, ligaments that couldn't be repaired. Regenerative medicine is super good at this. And things like PRP, platelet rich plasma, things like stem cells, different kinds of treatments. We can regrow stuff. We can heal things that we weren't able to. And there's a lot of people doing it now. Could be worth checking out. Longevity medicine. This is the idea of you want to raise your quality of life and your level of fitness, strength, breathing, cardiovascular condition, etc., to reduce all cause mortality as much as possible and improve the quality of your life for as much as possible. And there are different people, like Peter Attia, for instance, who will give many recommendations on how to get on that path. Precision medicine. So at one point, you'd have to have a certain volume or a certain level of development of a disease for it to be detected. But with precision medicine, more advanced tools, they could find the beginning of a potential condition or situation much sooner. And by doing that, by looking at that and getting on that path, you could definitely improve your life. You can detect things when they're easier to resolve. So when you get on it fast, you won't be going through what I was going through, running from basic test to basic test. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're fine." When if you're detecting something's off, they could find it way easier than we used to be able to do. So functional medicine, regenerative medicine, longevity medicine, precision medicine, these are very interesting fields. So health is the crown that only the sick can see. When you're not well, you really would like to be well. You want to be able to breathe again. You want to be able to move again. You want to be able to have the quality of life you've always wanted again. When you get on that path and you start incorporating some of these ideas, get a regular routine, start sleeping better, find a clean diet, whatever that looks like for you, eliminate everything that seems to irritate you, and start getting your macro micronutrients dialed in. Get some exercise. Try and get a strong baseline for your strength and cardiovascular and lung functions. Another exercise that a lot of people find super helpful is called rebounding. So if you have a small trampoline, it's just jumping up and down on that, and it causes the fluids in your body to move around, and it helps clear the system out. I've always found it to really, and again, I'm not sponsored by anybody. I don't have affiliates, but I've always found, and I approach things like not skeptically, but okay, we'll see if this works. I've always found it to be very energizing. So take that how you will, as another thing maybe to look at. A lot of people consider it to be a miracle exercise because it works so many systems. The gist is with these little movements, you can strengthen every single cell in the body and help get all the bullshit out of your body and help bring more oxygen in, get everything flowing better so the nutrients are moving better, so that the oxygen's moving better, so that the bullshit's getting out of your system easier. And that's an interesting notion. It's frustrating when you're not doing well. It sucks when you're feeling sick. And I would love for everybody to be super, super healthy. Now, I'm not a doctor or anything, I'm not pretending to be, but along with your health team, you can explore some of these ideas. And hopefully, if you're having challenges, you can get on the path to a better life. All right, that's the show. Thank you for your time. Rock on, party on. This is Shawn, signing out.